Like food and nutrition research, a question of incentives, information, and trade-offs. We don't know the best way to produce energy. We're trying to get better and better. We don't know the best way to make a hamburger or what the healthiest hamburger is. We want companies to innovate to make food. Anyway, let me backtrack to that. So energy discoveries, inventions, innovations are coming fast and furious. Solar panels are getting better and better and more efficient. Windmills are getting better and more efficient. But so is wood and solar. I mean, not wood. Wood stoves, I guess, are less polluting than they used to be. But we've gone toward energy density, toward reducing pollution from wood to peat to coal, oil, and natural gas. Energy efficiency increased. Combined cycle natural gas plants, some 60% efficient. They're the least cost source of energy for much of the country. And reliability increased and pollution increased. Emissions, even from coal plants, are far less than they used to be. So we've got cleaner power than we used to be. Nuclear pollutes even less, but it's much more complex, and critics say it's very heavily regulated. Federal government is subsidizing biofuels from ethanol to wood pellets. These are heavily polluting and expensive. Affirmatives, just zeroing those out. Federal government shouldn't be funding that. State government shouldn't be funding, particularly if they cost more, raise energy prices. And so this is the renewable fuels portfolio standards. You can X those out, critics would say. And of course, if arguments for them you want to research as well. Hydropower, geothermal. We could have much more hydropower. We could have in-stream hydro. There's lots of hydro sources because water is so much heavier than air. It's a much more capable energy source, but again, it's heavily regulated. Geothermal, somewhat limited by location, but now we've got hydraulic fracturing technology. You can go down deep at much less expense. Geothermal's also restricted by regulation, but is coming on strong. Wind and solar, again, continue to improve. Storage is the problem because they're intermittent and storage costs are high, but you've got people innovating on how better to support energy. A combination of geothermal and energy storage is sort of cool. Companies in Texas are pumping, I've forgotten if it's air or water, deep into these wells. And when energy's cheap from windmills, you pressurize it down. And then when energy is more expensive, you can get energy return, sort of bounce back from the pressure. And because the water is heated so much when it's underground, you get energy from that. So those companies are trying to develop. There's another company that is producing energy from natural gas, but they're combining natural gas with pure oxygen, and there are no CO2 emissions. Instead, it's industrial grade CO2 that is sold to companies that use CO2 for, carbonating Coca-Cola or other uses. So if you're concerned about CO2 emissions, you can get energy from natural gas with zero emissions. So technologies advance along the energy landscape as fuels can get cleaner, more reliable, more affordable. But you've got to compare them to each other. For people that are rich, they can get the most expensive energy they want that's the ultra cleanest. But for people that have lower income, my neighbor up here rebuilt his house. He didn't have enough points to even connect natural gas to use his heating. So he's powering his house with a wood stove. He had to install electricity, and then I guess later they go back for $30,000. They can install the natural gas for the kitchen. But when you do this, somebody's got a lot of money, they can afford this. But for lower income people, middle income people, it becomes more and more of an expense. Energy should be getting cheaper. It always was until the government came in and tried to mandate which sorts of energies we could use. And that hurts low income people the most. Back to food. What's the best way to do it? Well, again, here's this debate continues. We like debates. There's a book called The Economist Diet. Two economists who were overweight share their story of how they lost a bunch of weight. And this is cited by Emily Oster, another economist who writes about parent data, diets and data. She says, she cites this book, the simplest diet then is just eat less. This is best said in a book called The Economist Diet. To lose weight, weigh yourself every day, just eat less. You'll be hungry, you'll be miserable, but discipline, we've got discipline. She says it was beautiful in its simplicity, but she says, I can see why it hasn't caught on. Now that's their view, and if it worked for them, more power to them. You know, some people have more willpower than others. Maybe we're all supposed to get more willpower. I'm not a high willpower guy for whatever reasons. But here are two other books by people who also had experience dieting, women who wrote the book Anti-Diet and the second book, Intuitive Eating, and they're saying don't do what these two guys in the Economist Diet said. Don't do what Emily Oster recommended. It doesn't work for most people. Many women have gone through dieting their whole lives since they were children. They got overweight. They tried to diet. It didn't work. They blamed themselves. And that's what the doctors do. They blame you. They say, look, you're gaining a bunch of weight. I don't care how you lose weight. You got to lose weight. Just eat less and exercise more and try and lose 10, 20, 30 pounds. Well, again, that doesn't work, and that's what I write about. That's what other authors write about. That's what Gary Taubes and David Ludwig in their peer-reviewed publication explain. It's a hormone issue, not an energy balance issue. So this whole breakthrough in the last 10 years has come from doctors who got fat. Doctors, Gary Fettke, Tim Noakes, people who wrote books, marathoners who wrote books on running and talked about carbo loading and how to get enough energy for exercise. They both came down with type 2 diabetes, as their parents did. Not from being overweight necessarily, but from their bodies couldn't metabolize the carbohydrates healthy. It's not healthy for a lot of people. So they've stepped back, apologized, and when they cut out carbs, their diabetes went into remission, and that's the case for most people. So all the concern about the huge cost of insulin, the epidemic of obesity, diabetes, what if that just goes away while people change what they eat? They eat intuitively. And in talking to students, sort of the lesson is eat till you're full. It's natural for young people to eat when they're hungry and stop eating when they're full, right? So if your parents are saying, no, you need to lose some weight, Junior, just step away while you're still hungry. Again, that's the opposite of what these people are arguing works for them. You shouldn't go on a diet. The diet culture is bad news. The dieting is causing the problem. You can disrupt your metabolism. So Emily Oster also cites Virginia Sol Smith, who says these anti-diet posts, they say to accept obesity, that, yeah, there's a lot of women that are much heavier than they wish they were. They've given up on dieting. So the idea is that they're supposed to accept being really heavy. Well, it's not good for your health, right? People, your joints are a problem trying to carry that weight. People are metabolically unhealthy. They're unhappy. We want to celebrate and support people where they are, but we don't want to tell them that there's no solution. We can tell them don't diet, which is what these authors do, but we can say, well, don't eat breakfast cereal. Breakfast is the most dangerous meal. The whole dietary guidelines promoted in large part by the breakfast cereal industry, by the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the Kellogg's brothers, who were Seventh-day Adventists, and they were trying to get people to eat less meat. This was part of the progressive era agenda of the time. Don't eat meat, be slender, and that's a problem because I used to eat, I was 40 pounds heavier. I used to eat Raisin Bran for breakfast. Then I find out, I thought it was healthy, but it turns out I got 17 grams of sugar in every helping with the raisins and the sugar around the raisins. And of course the bran grains turned to glucose. I was much better off when I didn't eat until I was hungry. So I often don't eat in the morning because I'm not hungry. I'll have a cup of coffee, maybe a latte with whole fat. Well, not even whole fat. I use half and half and cream because fat is better for me than grains. And then I have my breakfast, I guess, at lunchtime. And I have an egg, or I have a fish or beef. But that's me. I'm 70. So maybe that wouldn't have worked for me when I was 20 or 30. The argument is eat till you're full. Don't follow the federal dietary guidelines. Good luck if you're in a school, because the federal government, the state governments are deciding what is available for you. So the science of food, young people care about food. We all care about food. Why not learn about it? Why not learn how your body works? If we want to protect the economy from federal energy policy and have a secure grid and not, die in blackouts and freeze in winter, we need to understand the economics of energy and the science of energy. We need to learn about the electricity grid. And we've got sort of two pipelines of energy: natural gas. Where I live, natural gas comes to this house, and electricity comes here. When my electricity went out for 2 days last winter, it would have got cold, except the natural gas furnace was still working. So the house was heated. I had to have little batteries to power my electronics. But having natural gas and electricity gives backup for the grid. If the government steps in and says, we're going to ban natural gas, you only get electricity, what happens when the grid goes down? Well, they found that out in Texas when the grid went down, and in California, almost in New York, where they ran out of electricity almost ran out of natural gas, because federal government, state governments doesn't allow natural gas pipelines from Pennsylvania into New York. Okay, switching things back and forth. The energy of movement and metabolism. Where do we get our energy? Well, we get it from, if you look online, it says we use oxygen to burn carbohydrates for energy. Well, that's one source of energy. It turns out we also use oxygen to burn ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate, acetone, the 3 fatty acids that make up ketones. When you don't eat for a while, whether it's fasted or time-restricted eating, your body runs out of glucose, right? So the glucose in your bloodstream gets used. The glucose, the glycogen in your muscles gets used. The glycogen stores in your liver is used, and then you're out of glucose. What your body does then is the fat in your fat cells is released into the body as ketones, and your body burns these ketones. You're in ketosis. Our ancestors had to survive starvation. Starvations happened over and over again, all through recorded history till the 1800s in the developed world. So our body, if it needs to go a week or two without eating, it can, because you need to be able to get to the next place. You need to survive. Yesterday or day before yesterday, I didn't eat all day, so I had like a 36-hour fast. Not because I was necessarily trying to fasting. A friend sent me an article about how fasting caused heart attacks. I wanted to test that theory. I survived, and I lost like 5 pounds over the 36-hour fast because my body was burning my body fat, and probably some of that was water loss as well. But did it harm my health? Is it bad to fast? Well, for a little kid or a teenager, your body's growing, it's burning a lot. But the better question is, what does your body need to grow? What nutrients does it need? It needs to maintain your metabolism, and then also, which is your blood pumping and your arms moving, plus moving around, your exercise. So we get macronutrients, which are protein, fat, and carbohydrates. We need the protein to rebuild our body, and that protein is made up of amino acids. So you get that from meat, you get it from some grains, beans, and plants provide these amino acids. But the most broad range of amino acids come from meat and fish. And if people don't eat meat and fish, if they're vegetarians or vegans, they can still get the amino acids they need, but it's much harder, and you generally need to take supplements to get some of the ones that are scarce. Also, plants have anti-nutrients as well as nutrients. Nuts have a lot of fat, but they've got oxalates and other issues. You also need micronutrients, potassium, magnesium, chlorine, all these little things that the micronutrients in food. So people say, well, eat green leafy vegetables. They've got micronutrients. Eat meat, eat different things. Okay. I would argue that you should spend some time researching the macronutrients and micronutrients you need, and the people who disagree, again, in a debate format. Because some people say, don't eat fat. Somebody put a chart up saying your death rate's 5 times higher if you eat processed meat. Well, is it? It depends on the study. Turns out they do associational studies. They ask people what they ate, and then they check 30 years later to see who died. And they say, gosh, the people that ate a lot of processed meats, they died at a higher rate than people that didn't eat processed meats. Well, does that mean the processed meats caused the death? Right? People that, Jason Fung has the example, there's an association between eating ice cream and drowning. People that eat the most ice cream drown far more often on the same day, same times. Why? Well, you eat ice cream when it's hot in the summer. You swim when it's hot in the summer. So the ice cream doesn't cause people to drown, although maybe if you eat a quart of ice cream and then go swimming, but mostly it's associational, caused by the heat of the summer. Similarly, people who eat more processed foods do other things. They smoke. That study that was published by the American Heart Association, the people who died, 27% smoked versus 17% in the people that ate less, that did less fasting. So the smoking is more likely the cause of the higher death rate, not the intermittent eating. Anyway, do this research yourself. Still, why is there so much disagreement about what foods are healthy? Vegans, vegetarians, pescatarians that eat only fish, paleo, carnivore, omnivore. There's politics in this that go back in our history, and I would argue the federal government has sort of locked in these standards that are not supported by the leading research, and yet they're still in the federal dietary guidelines, influencing the foods served in schools, hospitals, prisons, military, and so forth. Terence Keeley, scientist, researcher, breakfast is the most dangerous meal. He thought he was eating healthy, then turned out he had type 2 diabetes. He wrote a book about it. He said, don't eat breakfast. Our breakfast story was promoted by the Kellogg brothers, right? It was promoted by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who felt that meat was bad for us, caused lust in men and things like that. And, maybe it does. Let's do the research. But shifting to more and more people eating breakfast cereals, oatmeal for breakfast. My dad had oatmeals and blueberries for breakfast. Decade after decade, he gained weight, got type 2 diabetes. He thought that was healthy. And he had, low-fat milk, low-fat chocolate milk he liked because it was low-fat. But the chocolate in it was tons of sugar. Could you have had whole-fat chocolate milk with less sugar and the creaminess of fat? Well, fat was considered bad. So, big mess. Students should do their own research. We know some truths. People are unhealthy in the status quo. Obesity, mental health challenges, other challenges, you could argue it's caused or contributed to by federal guidelines and the locked-in academy. A whole separate set of ideas, which is newer, is the Ed Young's I Contain Multitudes. A big thing is in our gut. What we eat feeds the microbes. We need to have a healthy gut to feel healthy, and your weight, your mood, your long-term health determined by the good gut. Now, the good gut people are saying eat less meat, eat more plants, so you don't have to agree with all that. Tim Spector the same way. He calls for the Mediterranean diet. But students should research these people, and we're trying to figure out what foods contribute to our health, and you've got to learn on your own. This is more of the history. Market economists are often critical of the process of the progressive era, and how it changed the economy. We got the Federal Reserve, we got all these federal government policies that were major shifts from the way the country used to be. We also got the whole calorie counting world. This is the progressive era body project, calorie counting and disciplining your stomach. And these were women who argued, they were mostly elites, and they were sort of against the heavier set working women. They wanted to be slender, sort of the flappers of the 1920s, thin. And this was Lula Hunt Peters was very popular in the magazines. How to watch your weight. You need to count calories. Count how many calories are in your food, because if you want to be stylish and wear these clothes that look loose fitting, you need to eat less and exercise more. You need to count your calories. Well, turns out when you look at the history of this, this caused mental illness across the country. Women tried to count their calories, and they did. They lost weight for a while, then they went nuts because of the same energy balance problem that your body thinks it's starving. And so this story is told in Supersizing Urban America. The author talks about how inner cities got fast food with government help, but she's also the author of this Progressive Era Body Project. And it's sort of a separate issue, but in Supersizing, it turned out that after the riots of the 1970, the Watts riots that disrupted urban cities, they needed to rebuild. And there was a lot of attacks on companies that were owned by Asians instead of African Americans. So the federal government stepped in and said, we need to fund black-owned businesses in the inner cities. And it turned out that fast food restaurants, which were franchises, McDonald's, Burger King, other ones, the franchise could be owned by a black person or group, and therefore qualify for the federal government small business loan, because when they did the ratio, they didn't want giant companies, and a franchise counted as a small company. But if you tried to get a black-owned grocery store, you couldn't get Small Business Administration funding because too much volume. You've got more and more sales, and that went over the limit. So all through America, fast food restaurants are funded. Grocery stores are not, and that's one of the reasons you get the food desert in the inner cities, and you get this culture of fast food, processed food, seed industry, or seed oils that the critics say contribute to obesity and the lack of alternatives in the inner city. More on this, the American Dietitians Association, formed by a student of Kellogg, and these used to be handling institutional food, but this is really the Seventh-day Adventist Church advocating the low-fat diet and grain industry. Belinda Fetke talks about this in her presentation, just the history of how we got here and where the federal dietary guidelines came from. Most of the people in the federal dietary guidelines have ties, get funding from the food industry or the pharmaceutical industry, and are ethical vegans and vegetarians as well. So that biases their sense of what's valuable. So it's a blend of religion, science, philosophy, and politics. So, and this sort of gets ideological. This is in the conversation. Why is it, website, why is it that vegans and vegetarians are ideologically here? Well, it grew out of a left-wing ideology, says the authors. And you look at people on the left, and it's sad that so much is politicized, but that's the way it is. So the carnivores and the keto and the paleo people maybe are more conservative. The vegans, vegetarians, more progressive, modern day liberal. But you have the radical ideas sweeping Europe, ethical vegetarianism in the political left, but also, long history from the French Revolution on. The suffragettes, the feminists, this body project, progressive era was tied to people rejecting the violence inherent in killing animals, unjust social order, the patriarchy. So 20th century, the vegetarians are still on the left, Labour MPs, Jeremy Corbyn, others. Yeah. So just again, man of the year, physiologist Ansel Keys, not really trained in the discipline he was writing on. And he was battling against John Yudkin, who says sugar was the problem. We've had a massive increase in sugar production. Of course, Americans always eat more sugar, have always have, because of the connection of sugar and the slave trade and so forth. But he says sugar is killing us, we're eating too much. And I'm not saying you can't eat sugar. My experience was I cut back dramatically on sugar. I have unsweetened cocoa in my mocha along with a little coconut oil. The sugar, the chocolates I eat now have 1/3 to 1/4 the sugar that I used to eat, and it's great for me. It tastes better with less sugar. Your taste buds reset over time when you're not hitting them with so much sugar. But John Yudkin is saying, look, this epidemic of obesity or deaths caused by too much sugar, not saturated fat. And of course, the sugar industry was funding the studies that blame saturated fat, and you can read that online, how the sugar industry provided this. So